So today we're going to be talking about AI, art, and ownership and how those three things intersect. If you've been on any part of the internet this week, you've seen lots of conversation surrounding what generative AI looks like today, but then also how that impacts artists. Artists are divided on how they feel about AI. For some, it's an amazing tool that can help to elevate the talent that they already have, and for others, AI can be a threat to everything that they love about the things that they create and the things that they enjoy. So today we're here with Gam to talk about all things AI and how art intersects.
Cool. So, hi, I'm Gam. I'm the founder of Flossy AI. Previously, I started an art collective called Resolve. And I've been thinking a lot about the intersection between art and technology and how we can use AI to empower artists and give them creative superpowers.
For me, I'm Natalie, as you already know, but for those who don't know, I'm Natalie Na. I'm one of the co-founders of NewComma, which is a social media platform that connects Black and African creatives all over the world to each other, opportunities and resources. So to go straight into it, what do you define as art today? But then how do you think AI has elevated or hasn't elevated what you define as art?
I think, in general, the way I think about art is about anything that allows you to express something human. And I think that there's a worldview that there's a philosopher called Heidegger, actually, who I think has got a really interesting way of framing the difference between art and technology. He sees the technological worldview as the view of it's more how we see nature. Like, technologists see nature as standing reserve in the sense that it's something that can be transformed into something else for human use. Artists see the world as something that is to be reflected on, something that unveils kind of different truths. And so, you can summarize those two different views as the technologist sees a tree and thinks firewood, the artist sees a tree and starts to think of poems. So I think that's a nice way of thinking about the difference between art and technology.
Yeah, I find that really interesting because I think for myself in my creative career, one thing I established first was it's a lot like cooking or it's a lot like building, right? You have all of your ingredients, you have all your components, but what you create at the end of the day can be completely different.
Yeah.
Two people can get the exact recipe and it still tastes slightly different because everyone has their own flair of going about things. The measurements might be slightly off, they might use alternatives, they might have complete omissions, but at the end of the day, it's their own creation, it's their own output. And because I'm your typical multifaceted creative, I think one thing that was really important for me to understand was it's all about taking different things and ensuring that you have one cohesive thing at the end of the day. So with graphic design and Photoshop, you've got your different layers. With photography, retouching the same thing. If you're a music producer, you also have different sounds that you're layering. And with AI, you're also doing that same compositing with different elements. And I think attention for a lot of artists is the source of those layers and how that forms a new creation that they have.
Yeah, I think just as you're speaking, it's like this difference between, I think, creating and art. And you're talking about like cooking and making food. It's like, I think the attitude that you have towards that is like a thing as well, right? So for me, like, making a sandwich is a very functional thing. A chef can make a sandwich in exactly the same way, but it's an art form.
Yeah.
And so I think the attitude that you approach any task with kind of defines whether it's art or whether it's merely creation, or whether it's neither of those things. But
yeah, it's definitely having a flair. I think art or creativity always has like a little extra layer to make it more expressive, to make it more palatable, to make it more enjoyable, right, to process. And it's so interesting that you refer to making a sandwich as functional, because I've also been describing myself as a functional graphic designer lately. And the reason why I say that is because it doesn't have, of course, there's this element of flair and creativity that happens in design, but because I know I have an end goal with it, and is a very corporate end goal, there's not as much flexibility to be purely into the idea of this is how I'm feeling today and this is how that feeling has been processed in this creation. in that scenario, I need to communicate ABC, and I need to tick off these boxes to ensure that that's being communicated properly. And for me, that's very functional. It's a process that needs to feel linear,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it needs to feel effective. Whereas if I'm doing something purely for the enjoyment of expression, it goes up and down.
Mm-hmm.
It's less linear in that sense. And I think it there's a freedom in that, right? There's a freedom in not necessarily having to be married to a process
Mm-hmm.
to getting things done. And I think that's where a lot of creatives find joy, right? And I think that the tension of AI is you lose that process, you lose that back and forth of, oh, this didn't work, I'm going to try something else. This I experienced this one thing in life that inspired me to do this thing,
Mm-hmm.
or I started writing this way because I went through this particular period in my life that defined that style of writing. Whereas with AI, for some, it can feel very much like, okay, I'm just gonna lift all of that experience and regurgitate it for other people.
So yeah, one of the questions that I have, or the things that I think about is, would you consider AI to be a technologist or an artist, in the sense that we tend to, like, I don't know, humanize AI, or do you see it more as a tool for humans to use?
I think it can be both. And the reason why I say that is it wasn't necessarily created from air, right? We well they whoever whoever owns I think that's the thing in itself.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
that's the people building the technology that facilitates AI, and then there's also the people who are providing the data to enable AI,
Mm,
right? And that's why I say it can be both things,
mm,
because it can be very useful in reminding you of the facts that you already know to be true, right? It's also an amalgamation of literally everyone else's thoughts, right? It's not, I personally don't necessarily think it's always creating new things or new components. It's creating new combinations of those components. That's how I currently interpret it. But I think that's probably what's going to be the primary difference between AI and humans,
mm.
at least for the next few months. Because who knows? I was going to say years, but this thing has been moving really fast,
Yeah,
so it's hard to tell.
I think that that's the key thing, is that competition.
Hmm.
You know, when you compare AI to other technologies, like, I don't know, like a camera or a new sort of paintbrush, it doesn't take from, you know, when you're creating a paintbrush, from you don't take from a painter,
Yeah,
and you don't replace a painter in that way.
yeah.
Whereas with AI, it's like there's this thing where it's taken from artists,
Hmm.
and the use case can come across like it's replacing artists.
Yeah, I definitely see how that can be the case because, like you've mentioned, with a camera, with a paintbrush, with an Apple Pencil,
Right.
all of these things require human intervention to work,
Mm.
right? Whereas with an AI agent, you don't have to be there. It can take calls for you. It can leave messages for you. It can process thoughts that you could have had, but it can also send the email on your behalf.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's where the true threat comes for a lot of people. Where of course you can be empowered within whatever capacity you're in to be a lot better at your job with the help of AI. So even with the Shopify CEO, he was talking about how employees need to basically come to terms with the fact that AI is here.
Mm.
So they have to quickly adapt instead of deferring that confrontation with AI.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess he's kind of saying the opportunity lies in embracing who can embrace these tools as much
Yeah,
as possible. I'm not sure if I agree with that. I think the opportunity is more around how can you be different from the training data,
yeah.
like in the sense of, you know, all these tools are like trained on artists, on history.
Mhm.
How can you be different in terms of being able to visualize some sort of future that hasn't been visualized, or something like that?
I think based on that, with artists, the opportunity, I do agree, comes with how can you take the basis of where we're at now and use that to elevate your personal identity? And it always, I feel like it always boils down to that at the end of the day. No matter what new tech, technological advancement comes through, you need to be able to have a solid understanding of who you are and the value that you bring to your spaces to be able to define what that means, because the world is going to keep changing, but you need to be able to know that, okay, this is the basis of what defines my work.
Yeah.
No matter what is thrown at me, I'll be able to shape shift based on that. And if you are someone who shape shifts entirely based on those advancements, you end up finding that you don't really know who you are, because you're changing just as quickly as everything else is. But if you have your foundations, if you have a basis, I think those are the people who are going to survive through this. Yeah.
I guess another question I have is like, do you think all artists are going to, depending on the sort of artist you are, maybe in terms of even stage and career, do you think AI is going to have a varying effect?
Definitely. I think it's also on the kind of artist that you are. So even detaching from AI for a sec, even looking at the different media that artists create with, there are some artists that will always sketch at the beginning of their process, no matter what they're working on. And there's some artists that might go straight into Photoshop or straight into Procreate because they are fine with the efficiency of that elevation of technology. And I think that level of thinking would apply here as well, where you would have artists who are dedicated to staying traditional with their processes. And for some of them, that can elevate their work even further. In my article, I was also comparing it to fast food and like slow cooked food, or using medication to lose weight, or going through more traditional means of working out, eating less, blah blah. Is the same thing here, where people might actually prefer a more traditional, slower cooked, artisanal approach to art compared to the microwave version of AI. I think we're going to definitely start seeing a shift in the perception of art and how the art has been created. And the artists who are going to thrive in this era are those who understand when to elevate their process with AI and when to kind of scale back on the AI and lean into the things that feel more human. We literally have platforms that are saying, platforms like Procreate that are creating series based on human-made art, and that for them is what their unique selling point is now. They have a platform or they have a program that is created for human artists, right? And there are going to be other people on the other side of that who are looking for art created by humans. So I do think it's going to boil down to understanding who your audience is and what your output is, and then using that to determine what your process is as well. And yeah, I think it's that discernment that will really take artists forward in that.
Yeah, when you're just saying that, I was thinking about like plants. Like, you can buy an artificial plant, put it in your house, but most people would prefer a plant that's kind of made from nature, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it sounds like what you're saying is an opportunity is around being able to, show your process, evidence your
Exactly.
process, and yeah, kind of show the human touch that you've put into making. And people doing that, right, with like content creation, creating
Exactly.
content around their processes. So what we're saying is maybe it's more of that as the opportunity,
Yeah.
more of that sort of thing. One of the things that's like with AI, I think is really important is to understand what we mean by training data, like what training data is. And yeah, it's people's artwork. And sometimes when we talk about it as data, we flatten the emotional impact of what art is. Like the feeling of seeing a piece that looks amazing, hearing your favorite song, we flatten that when we call it training data. And so I think that there's this, and by doing that, we have this false dichotomy where we have human-made versus machine-made. The reality is all of it's human-made, but processed in a slightly different way. And then there's this debate around the legality of using human data without express permission. And a lot of people say, well, if you use an artist's work without asking their permission beforehand, then it's theft. I take a slightly different view in the sense that I don't think these AI companies are claiming the work as their own. And so to call it theft doesn't seem like the right label, even though I'd agree it's an unethical thing to do. I take the form, well, I like to consider it as more an imitation type thing. What you do when you remix an art style is you're imitating that artist. You're not saying you're that artist. You're expressly saying, I want to do something in that artist style. And you can think of imitation as a form of flattery. So the question is that we were discussing before is, does creating an imitation of a work reduce the value of that original work? Or is there an argument to say, if I remix your work, I'm actually paying homage and adding value to the original? So when we talk about the Studio Ghibli thing, for example, where OpenAI allow people to make stuff in the Studio Ghibli style, well, I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but I am saying a byproduct of that might be more people hear about Studio Ghibli and more people want to go and watch Spirited Away again. But where do you think that you draw the line between taking something, being inspired by it, and creating something new and adding to the culture, and I don't know, I suppose theft or something unsavory? Where do you think you draw that line?
I think the main thing that would determine if it's theft or not is regulation. And I'll use music as an example here. In music, when a song is being sampled, interpolated, or being covered. And in all of those scenarios, the artists know what the exchange is, what compensation looks like. Is there compensation in the first place? Does one need to cite this as any level of copyright infringement and stuff like that? All of that is regulated and all of that has a structure. But within AI, as we know it today, that same level of regulation or definition of use cases doesn't exist on that same plane or on that same level. So it feels very insecure for artists to know that whatever art they put into the world can be used in ways that they haven't defined. The same way you would hire an illustrator to do some work for you. You have gotten a license to use it as a book cover, but you don't have the license to use it for merch, for instance, or for any other kind of use case. And it becomes very difficult to feel certain that what you have consciously subscribed to is what will actually be the case. And I think that's where most of the potential danger is, in terms of artists not feeling confident that their work will stay defined as theirs, and in turn being compensated for that identity or for that translation.
Giving artists autonomy is a really key thing. So with Flossy, what we're doing is we're allowing artists to chat anytime their art is getting used, and also compensating them when that art is made something like a product like a new sort of merchandise.
So definitely aligned there, because for us at NewComma, it's also about showcasing Black and African creativity specifically. And we know that that particular facet of being Black or African has been overlooked in terms of the wider creative industry, and empowering that demographic to be able to be themselves without diluting who they are, still getting compensated for their work, still being able to compete in global markets is definitely something that will help take the wider global creative industry to the next level. Because we have been put in several scenarios where they're like, oh, this market doesn't really matter. They then actively engage the market, and then they find that there is true value in that. And I think for both creatives and for African and Black creatives, you can find both of those narratives to be true in a lot of ways. How exactly does Flossy work? Does an artist upload a key artwork and then other people can do different versions of that artwork? What would you say that process is?
Yeah, so that's exactly how it works. Artists can upload a kind of source piece of art, and their fans or a community can remix that with a prompt, and then we can take that remix and allow that remix to be made into different products. Think t-shirts, mugs, phone cases. So in that way, we want to create a new revenue stream for artists and say, actually, there's huge opportunity in AI if we get the business models right to help artists earn revenue in new ways.
So what happens after the order has been made? Does the artist then have to handle shipping and handling, or does Flossy handle all of that?
Yeah, we take care of all of that. So the artist doesn't have to worry about the logistics of getting a product made and delivered. So we handle that fulfillment process. And so, the artist earns a commission. All they really have to do is give us permission to use their design.
I think that's the best part because for a lot of creatives, they just want to create and call it a day. I think my sister is like that as well. She's an illustrator, and for her, she's always like overwhelmed by all of the admin and logistics that happens after the creating. Her ideal situation is I'm going to focus purely on the art of creating. Everything else, if someone else can do it, amazing. So yeah, I think it's great that Flossy aligns with that sentiment of artists focusing on what they truly love doing, which is the creating. And I think for us in NewComma as well, our whole philosophy is creating spaces where creators can come together, connect with each other, but then also find opportunities and resources all in the same place. And I think for platforms like Flossy, that's also quite useful because you can also use it to find new creatives who can have different visual languages on the Flossy platform. And that brings us to our partnership. In the next few weeks or the few days, we'll give you a date soon enough. We'll be selecting 3 artists to host on the Flossy platform where different people can remix your work and basically customize your work and create that into different sets of merch to be delivered to your homes. So the way this will work is we'll do an open call via NewComma where you can submit your artwork and we'll select 3 artists to be hosted on the Flossy platform. We'll be doing lots of content on these 3 selected artists and stay tuned for more details. And the best part of all of this is the artists are going to be compensated and they're going to get paid to be themselves, which forms the basis of everything that we're doing at NewComma with the launch of 2.0, where we have so many amazing features launching that will enable artists to be as expressive as they want to be, meet as many people as they want to meet, and of course find clients and collaborators to help elevate their creative careers. And yeah, we're looking forward to doing that with Flossy.